In the last half hour, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has declared al-Qaeda has established a new home base in Iran. He made that assertion without any hard evidence in what appears to be a last-minute offensive against Tehran as Pompeo and the rest of the Trump administration prepare to leave power in Washington. He also said he could confirm the death of al-Qaeda's Abu Muhammad al-Masri. That death was reported last year. Al-Masri gunned down by Israeli operatives in Iran.
Al-Qaeda has a new home base. It is the Islamic Republic of Iran. As a result, bin Laden's wicked creation is poised to gain strength and capabilities. We ignore this Iran-Al-Qaeda nexus at our own peril. We need to acknowledge it. We must confront it. Indeed, we must defeat it.
So let's start with Alan Fisher at the White House. Alan, we were talking last hour about things that usually happen in the last week of an administration. How does this sort of sit in that usual time frame?
It's certainly not unheard of, but it is rather unusual that the Secretary of State would make such a speech and that he would declassify information during a speech, drawing links between al-Qaeda and Iran. Just by contrast, these rumours, these stories, these allegations have been around for some considerable time, over a number of years. Even before 9/11, there was talk of Iran having connections with al-Qaeda. Certainly the intelligence community has always been very sceptical of that idea. Mike Pompeo has always been keen to demonise Iran. He's very much behind Donald Trump's idea of maximum pressure. He is, of course, a former CIA director, so he will get intelligence across his desk that some in the intelligence community won't even see. But we know that the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, very important think tank here in the United States, at the end of 2019 published a report that suggested the links between al-Qaeda and Iran are very, very small indeed, and suggested that if there were high-profile members of al-Qaeda, there was maybe no more than 5 living in Iran. That really doesn't matter to Mike Pompeo, of course. He will suggest that if you've got one, you've got more than enough. There's a concern that Mike Pompeo is doing two things. First of all, making it very difficult for the Biden administration, the incoming Biden administration, to make any sort of peace moves towards Iran, for any sort of rapprochement, to make sure that the two nations get on better, and perhaps even consider going back into the Iran nuclear deal, which was negotiated by Joe Biden's old boss, Barack Obama's administration. The second thing that some people on the Hill are very concerned about is that by tying al-Qaeda to Iran, then that Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump and the administration would then have an excuse to launch some sort of attack in Iran itself. Now, to go and do that sort of thing, you would normally need congressional approval. Given that the House is controlled by Democrats, given that the Senate is now controlled by Democrats, you're not going to get that. However, there is an ongoing authorization for the use of military force which targets al-Qaeda. So if you could go and say, well, we weren't attacking Iran, we were attacking members of al-Qaeda, that is why we carried out that attack. That would certainly give them that. And we know that there's been some concern, particularly since the turn of the year, that Donald Trump might be planning some sort of assault on Iran. There's nothing really concrete to back that up, just some grumbling, some chatter in the intelligence community, annoying fear for some, but that would certainly be a way to explain any action that they take if they say, well, there is this authorization for the use of military force against al-Qaeda, that is why we launched that assault. Not saying that anything like that is going to happen, no, but that it is in a way trying to put that Pompeo speech in some sort of context.
And so why say all of this now, as we point out, so close to the end of the administration? Is this, I mean, one of the reasons, maybe another attempt to pull some focus away from everything else that's going on?
Well, two reasons for it. One, he's not got the platform to do this much more often. And as I say, he's trying to make things difficult for the incoming Biden administration to make any sort of moves towards Iran, which has been really a country that has been targeted by the Trump administration from the very early days. Remember back in 2016, before the election then, Donald Trump said that one of the first things he would do on day one would pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. He was talked out of that on a couple of occasions when he had to reauthorize, but when it came to doing it for the third time, he said, I'm absolutely not doing it, and refused to do it. So pulled the plug on it at that point. The other thing is, Mike Pompeo is interested in running for the presidential nomination for the Republican Party in 2024. So being tough in Iran, he believes, plays well to the base and makes him look strong. And certainly if you continue to attack Iran, it plays well with the conservative base. America has scar tissue from what happened during the Carter administration when the hostages were taken at the Iranian embassy. They do not trust Iran. That has been the case for many, many, many years. Donald Trump, to a degree, tapped into that. Rather than played up on it, he tapped into that. And so there is always a concern about what Iran is going to do next. And in some cases, people close to Donald Trump would say they've been justified in some of the things that Iran has done, and it's been true with what they've predicted and what they've said, but they would like to continue this campaign of maximum pressure, and they're hoping that by highlighting this, it makes it much more difficult for Joe Biden to step away from that.
Alan Fisher's at the White House. Thank you for that, Alan. Reaction from Iran with our correspondent in a moment. I just want to show you this tweet first of all. Javad Zarif, we'll go into this in more detail with Dilsa Jabari in a moment, but, you know, lines there about warmongering lies. No one has fooled. All 9/11 terrorists came from Secretary Pompeo's favourite Middle East destinations, none from Iran. That's the Iranian foreign minister, Dilsa Jabari. I mean, predictable sort of reaction from the Iranians there, but Mike Pompeo came out with a lot of, well, he came out with a lot of specifics without necessarily backing it up with evidence.
Yes, certainly. He said that he had documentation that provided proof that 8 of the 9/11 hijackers had traveled to or through Iran prior to the attack that was carried out on September 11th in 2001. But he didn't specify what purpose they had for traveling through this country. He also said that he believed very strongly that they have set up, al-Qaeda has set up an office and base in Iran, and that they are continuing their fundraising activities. And he put forth some very, very distinct and very strong possibilities or scenarios that if there was a strong relationship between this government or the system in Iran and al-Qaeda, the combination could be very, very deadly for the international community, that they should not let that happen. This kind of language, this kind of rhetoric that was used by Mike Pompeo reminded me of when Colin Powell was speaking at the UN in 2003 before the United States invaded Iraq. It seemed like there was a groundwork being laid for an excuse to carry out some kind of an action. This is, of course, something that we've heard, like Alan mentioned, there's been rumors of this, whispers of this over the past few months, that President Trump wanted to strike some of Iran's nuclear facilities in order to deter the country from pursuing any further its nuclear activities. But Iran, for its part, has been very, very strong in their position. They haven't altered at all. We heard from the Supreme Leader on Friday, who said that the Iranians aren't waiting for the U.S. to return to the JCPOA or the nuclear agreement of 2015. What they want is an immediate lifting of the sanctions that the U.S. has imposed on Iran since they withdrew from the deal in 2018. They've left it. That's fine. And we don't care, is the feeling. But the sanctions they've imposed on us since then are absolutely inhumane and have had really serious economic consequences on the population of this country. So that is the position here. And this speech will be seen as another attempt by this administration in the final days to try and make things very, very difficult for President-elect Joe Biden, who, of course, has had a personal relationship of about 30 years with Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. The foreign minister was the Iranian ambassador to the UN decades ago. At the same time, Joe Biden was also working for the U.S. within the UN. So the two have had numerous meetings. They have had some kind of a relationship in the past. And the Foreign Minister, Javad Zarif, has spoken about that relationship. And he said that he believes the president-elect to be much more logical and much more well-versed in foreign policy and understanding this region. So there is a sense that the incoming administration will see things very, very differently. And certainly this language that we heard today will not be heard in the coming weeks after January 20th.
Thank you, Dulce Jabari in Tehran.